What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another video. So, in my opinion, one of the best stories in the NFL the past couple of years has been the turnaround and the ascension of the Denver Broncos. They put themselves in a pretty tough situation, arguably an impossible situation, and now they've ascended to not only become a competitive team again, but to become one of the most elite in the NFL that has a legit shot at hoisting the Lombardi Trophy come the end of Super Bowl 61. So I figured it'd be a great video to do a deep dive on where the Broncos were before all this happened, what happened when it all went down, and how they've come out of it even better than ever. And I think it'd be super interesting because it's from the perspective of a Broncos fan, so I think I'd be able to add a lot of nuance to all the good, but a lot more so a lot of bad that went on all of these years. So sit back, grab a drink, because I think we're going to be here for a while, and without further ado, let's get into it. So in order to understand everything that I'm about to cover, we got to establish some background, and to do that, we got to go a ways back. We got to go all the way back to 2015. Off the heels of a historic defense and one of the Super Bowl's best defensive performances, the Denver Broncos brought home their third Super Bowl title, defeating the upstart 15-1 Carolina Panthers led by that season's MVP, Cam Newton, by a score of 24-10. Legendary quarterback Peyton Manning, future Hall of Famer, 5-time MVP, and now 2-time Super Bowl champion, and an 18-year veteran, and age 39 at this point, retired shortly after, riding off into the sunset. His last season wasn't the Sheriff's finest outing. He threw 9 touchdowns to 17 interceptions in an injury-shortened campaign, but the legend still got the ending his career deserved nonetheless. With his retirement and apparent successor, Brock Osweiler, taking a $72 million contract with the Texans that offseason, the Broncos had a hole at the QB position to fill for the 2016 season. Surely, a team with the high pedigree like the Denver Broncos, they just won the Super Bowl, surely a team like that could fill that QB position in due time, as difficult as it would be. Right? A couple months later, the Broncos decided to trade up to the 26th pick in the 2016 draft, and with that pick, they got their guy, quarterback out of Memphis, Paxton Lynch. He was added to a busy QB room with himself, Trevor Siemian, and Mark Sanchez. So it wasn't necessarily a given or really even likely that Lynch would be starting for the Broncos in 2016, but in the long term, he was the guy. And that really rang true. Lynch was viewed as a pretty raw prospect coming out of college, so it really wasn't a shock to Broncos fans or really people across the NFL as a whole that he was not the starter come week 1 in 2016. Those honors went to 2015 7th round pick out of Northwestern, Trevor Siemian. And before we talk about Siemian at all, I just want to make it clear that I think Trevor Siemian was the perfect quarterback for the Broncos in the position that he was put in. For his time with the Broncos, he was a perfect game-managing bridge quarterback. Exactly what the Broncos needed at that point. Why he's looked at a little more poorly nowadays, we'll get into in a little bit. The Broncos started out the season pretty solid. After Lynch's underwhelming first career start against the Falcons in Week 5, the Broncos rolled into their bye week at 7-3. After a heartbreaking loss on Sunday night against the Chiefs in Week 12, everything just kind of went south from there. After a win against the Jags and another underwhelming start for Lynch, which was his second career one, the Broncos dropped 3 in a row, dropping to 8-7, eliminating them from playoff contention before the final game. Before that last game against the Raiders, it was announced that head coach Gary Kubiak, hired right before that magical 2015 Super Bowl season, would be retiring. So, if you're keeping track at home, that means the Broncos head coach and quarterback duo that won them a Super Bowl back in 2015 were both gone now. Not even a calendar year after the championship. To the Broncos' credit, they picked a really good offseason to be in need of a head coach. This head coaching cycle was loaded. It produced the names the like of Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, and Sean McDermott. The Broncos saw all of these names, especially that middle one, the son of the greatest coach in Broncos history, Mike Shanahan, who previously brought home the franchise's first 2 Super Bowls. They saw all 3 of these names, and they went with Vance Joseph. For the 2017 season, the expectation really was the Broncos would just get this thing back on track, Maybe a division title with the emerging Raiders and Chiefs from last year and the couple years before that. Maybe that was a little ambitious, but maybe 10-6, a playoff spot. That was definitely the expectation for the Broncos. And this was especially made so by that, this was year 2 of Paxton Lynch. He was ready to take the reins and show why the Broncos spent a first-round pick on him. Not only did that not happen, not only were the Broncos an underwhelming team, Lynch didn't even start. Trevor Siemian won the job again, which this being year 2 for Paxton Lynch, and Siemian, again, being a bridge game managing quarterback. This was extremely concerning. After a 3-1 start highlighted by a 42-17 beating of one of last season's best in the Dallas Cowboys, the season went south, and it went south quickly. The Broncos proceeded to lose 8 games in a row, with Siemian, Brock Osweiler, and Paxton Lynch, who started once in that span, a 21-14 loss at the Raiders in which he was very underwhelming yet again. The Broncos wrapped up the season 5-11, splitting between Siemian and Osweiler, until the final game against the Chiefs, in which they had already clinched their playoff spot, so the Chiefs would be resting their starters, so they decided to give the game to Lynch, a kind of prove-it start, if you will. He proceeded to throw 254 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, an 87.3 rating, and also a fumble on top of that in a 27-24 loss. Not exactly what you want to see in a prove-it start. And a fun fact, if you can recall, Kansas City was resting their starters that day because they already clinched everything. They were locked into their playoff position. So, they also decided to give their young quarterback a shot. They decided to give their young rookie his first career start. That rookie was Patrick Mahomes. So heading into the 2018 offseason, the Broncos were at a crossroads and were given 2 critical choices to make. You either A, go with Paxton Lynch, give him one last year, because again, you spent a first-round pick on this guy, and you want to be absolutely sure if he's the guy or if it's time to cut ties, or you cut those ties now and cut your losses and go for one of these quarterbacks in the free agency class. The Broncos opted to go with the latter. The Broncos signed Case Keenum, coming off of what many thought was a career resurgence with the Vikings the season prior and their magical run to the NFC Championship, giving him a 2-year, $36 million contract. This all but spelled the end of Paxton Lynch era, as he was released shortly after the 2018 preseason. That's tough, man. And with that 5-11 record, the Broncos found themselves with the 5th overall pick in the 2018 draft. Everyone knew that Keenum was just a short-term fix, basically a step above in the bridge genre of Trevor Siemian, if you will. So drafting the QB of the future was definitely on the table for the Broncos with this pick. At 5, the notable names still on the board were Josh Rosen out of UCLA, Lamar Jackson out of Louisville, and Josh Allen out of Wyoming. Denver surprisingly opted to go defense, drafting Bradley Chubb out of NC State, hoping to create a lethal edge duo with himself and Broncos legend and franchise sack leader Von Miller. And if we look ahead a little bit at Bradley Chubb, he was a very mixed bag for the Broncos. When he was on the field, he definitely showed that potential to be that 1-2 punch with himself and Von Miller, earning Pro Bowl nods in 2020 and 2022, and registering a career-high 12 sacks in his rookie year. However, the availability just was an issue for Chubb, and it led to him not really getting off the ground that much in Denver. He missed almost all of the 2019 season, almost all of the 2021 season, and that Pro Bowl season in 2020, it came when Von Miller missed the entire season after an injury in training camp. So that duo of Miller and Chubb, after Chubb's rookie year, it was barely even on the field. And, all of you know how vastly successful Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson are at this point, so I don't even really have to get into that. The Broncos surprisingly opted to not draft any QBs at all in a very deep class. However, with their second-round pick, they did draft a pretty solid prospect in SMU's Courtland Sutton. The season started off a little shaky. After a 2-0 start, the Broncos dropped 4 in a row and found themselves at 3-6 heading into the bye, having also just traded franchise legend Demaryius Thomas to the Texans. In this season, though, a bright spot emerged. Hometown hero out of Colorado and undrafted free agent Philip Lindsay burst onto the scene and established himself as the starting running back. He became the first undrafted free agent in NFL history to begin his career with back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons. In that bye week, though, something just seemed to click. The following week at the white-hot 7-2 Chargers, Keenum led a game-winning drive with no timeouts, capped off by a 34-yard field goal from Brandon McManus to shock the Chargers. Then the following week, they also upset the 7-2-1 Steelers, secured on a last-second goal line interception from defensive lineman Shelby Harris. Then the next week, the Broncos took care of the struggling Bengals on the road, and all of a sudden, the Broncos were 6-6 in the midst of a wildcard race and had a pretty favorable schedule with the 2-10 49ers on deck. However, in the lead up to that game, star wide receiver Emmanuel Sanders suffered a torn Achilles in practice ending his season. With the very inexperienced receiver room, it was a blow the Broncos were just not able to recover from. The Broncos dropped that game to the 49ers, then the next three, and finished the year 6-10. Head coach Vance Joseph was fired the day after the season ended. Unlike 2017, this really wasn't the best offseason to be in need of a head coach, but there were still some highs that produced names like Matt LaFleur, Brian Flores, and the recently unretired Bruce Arians. The Broncos opted for Vic Fangio. There's a bit of a trend starting to develop here. The Broncos also had a bit of a large free agency spending period, snagging tackle Jawan James and safety Kareem Jackson, as well as swapping out Case Keenum for another veteran in Joe Flacco as they sent Keenum to Washington. In the draft, Denver traded down and selected tight end out of Iowa, Noah Fant, with the 20th pick. In the second round at pick 42, Denver selected their next the guy, quarterback out of Missouri, Drew Lock. And once we fast forward to the actual season, it really could not have started any worse. The Broncos started 0-4 and at some point were 2-5 after a pretty brutal loss to the Chiefs at home on Thursday night. The Broncos shipped out star wide receiver Emmanuel Sanders to the 49ers, paralleling kind of exactly what they did with Demaryius Thomas the season prior. After a loss to the Colts dropped the Broncos to 2-6, Flacco sustained an injury that would ultimately end his season. Now, you would think this would be a golden opportunity for the Broncos to plug in Lock, see what they've got with the young guy. And, I mean, you would be right. That's like textbook when you go to a young quarterback, try to give your team a spark when they're struggling. Problem is, Drew Lock got hurt in the preseason. Yeah, Drew Lock was hurt in the preseason, and he was still on IR at this point. So they turned to third-string quarterback Brandon Allen, who led the Broncos to a win against the Browns, a 20-0 lead in the second half against the Vikings, which they subsequently blew, and a 20-3 trouncing at the hands of the Bills. So, about as well as starting a third-string quarterback for a decent period of time will go. At this point, though, Locke was ready to go. They activated him off of IR and gave him his first career start against the Chargers in Week 13. Locke didn't do anything crazy, but managed to lead the Broncos to a win, including he and Sutton drawing a game-sealing DPI to set McManus up to hit the game-winning field goal as time expired. The next week on the road in Houston against a playoff team, Locke and the Broncos steamrolled the Texans. They got out to a 38-3 lead before eventually winning 38-24. Broncos did drop their next one, 23-3 in a snowstorm in Kansas City, but they wrapped up the season strong, beating the Lions and Raiders, wrapping up 2019 at 7-9. So for those of you keeping track, that is a 5-3 record after that 2-6 start, and they were 4-1 under games in which Drew Lock started. And he was pretty solid in those 5 games. He ended up throwing for 1,020 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3 picks, and an 89.7 QB rating. As the Broncos headed into the offseason, Broncos fans had something they hadn't had in quite a while. They had some optimism. I was even at the Lions game that year, and I made it a point to buy a game pin at the gift shop of that Chargers game because I wanted to have a claim of Drew Lock's first career start because I was super excited to see where his career went from there. Oh my god, did past me not even know? That's crazy. So the Broncos headed into this offseason with one goal in mind, capitalizing on this optimism and really building a strong team around what they believe was their new franchise quarterback. And they brought in some big guns to surround the quarterback with, bringing in corner A.J. Bouye and defensive end Jarrell Casey by trade, Graham Glasgow to boost the O-line, and Melvin Gordon to form a 1-2 punch in the backfield with him and Phillip Lindsay. In the draft, the Broncos wanted to help Locke even more, doubling up on receivers by getting what many thought to be the best of his class in Jerry Jeudy at 15 and KJ Hamler at 46. Another thing the Broncos did was fire offensive coordinator Rick Scarangelo and brought in Pat Shurmur. No exaggeration here, this is legit one of the worst moves in franchise history, but we'll get into that a little later. And yeah, Scarangelo by no means was this offensive guru. He was not the best OC in the slightest, but this is a textbook example in sports of the grass is not always greener. But again, we'll get into that a little later. Looking back, really, the writing should have been on the wall because Von Miller suffered a season-ending injury in training camp. But they got a Monday Night Football slot in Week 1 against the Titans, who were coming off an AFC Championship appearance. Denver was ready to make some noise in these empty stadiums, because of COVID and whatnot. Honestly, it's probably a good thing that these stadiums were empty, because this team was hot donkey ass. Drew Lock got hurt in Week 2, and it turns out he loves giving the other team the ball. He threw 16 touchdowns to 15 interceptions this year. The quarterback spot was split between him, Jeff Driscoll, Brett Rippon, and then no one. Because the night before the Saints game, the three of them decided to break COVID protocol, and they got busted, and the Broncos actually played that game with no quarterbacks on the roster. That game was just so much fun to experience. So, yeah, they went 5-11. Locks sucked. They were destroyed by injuries, and the Broncos were they were right back at square one. So the Broncos headed into the 2021 offseason with the main goal in mind of reinventing their defensive backfield, because it turns out AJ Boye sucks. So they traded him, and they ended up signing Kyle Fuller and Ronald Darby, again with the goal of having a very deep defensive backfield. And then with the 9th pick in the draft that year, they ended up snagging who would turn into the best corner in the NFL in the following years out of Alabama, Pat Surtain. Now, all these defensive moves are great, but what about quarterback, you ask? Well, I'm glad you did. The Broncos, they decided to go all out. They decided to get a major upgrade by trading a 6th-round pick for Teddy Bridgewater. Yeah, this is in competition for one of the most lateral position upgrades of all time. So uninspiring. So, it was perfect for the uninspiring Vic Fangio coaching staff. Under Bridgewater, though, the Broncos got out to a 3-0 start. It was against the Giants, Jags, and Jets, though, so once they started playing real teams, reality hit the Broncos like a truck. They dropped 4 in a row after that, including a home loss to the Raiders, who fired their coach a couple days before. So at 4-4, the Broncos decided to trade franchise legend Von Miller to the Rams, marking an end of an era. This wasn't the end of the season, though. After a big win in Dallas, the Broncos headed into the bye at 5-4, and at 7-6, they were well within the hunt for a wildcard spot, as they welcome in the Bengals with an identical record in Week 15. The game could not have gone any worse. Teddy Bridgewater went down with a really scary season-ending injury, and in the second half, Drew Lock came in, and in the fourth quarter, down by 5 in the red zone, he completely botched an RPO, giving the Bengals the ball back, who went on to win the game. Given Bridgewater's season was over, he ended up throwing for 3,052 yards, 18 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and a 94.9 QB rating. Yeah, I'm thinking what you're thinking. That is the most Teddy Bridgewater stat line, of all time. You get what you get. So with Bridgewater being out, Drew Lock got the last 3 starts and lost all 3, not throwing a single touchdown pass. The Broncos wrapped up the year 7-10, right back at square one once again. Now, I forgot to mention this. Between 2020 and 2021, the Broncos hired a new GM for the first time since 2011, George Payton. So, on the surface, it appears the Broncos still had no direction. They just wrapped up season number 6 in a row of no playoffs, but going into the second offseason under George Payton, things were about to change.
Broncos country, let's ride.
The Broncos got to work early. A day after the season, they fired both head coach Vic Fangio and offensive coordinator Pat Shurmur, effectively cleaning house with the coaching staff. The Broncos opted to replace Vic Fangio with the offensive coordinator of Aaron Rodgers' back-to-back MVP campaigns in Green Bay, Nathaniel Hackett. The Broncos were not done. They decided enough was enough with the QB carousel. I hope you have a pen and paper because there's a lot to memorize here. The Broncos traded Noah Fant, Shelby Harris, Drew Lock, a 2022 first-round pick, a 2022 second-round pick, a 2023 first-round pick, a 2023 second-round pick, and a 2022 fifth-round pick to the Seattle Seahawks for 10-time Pro Bowl quarterback Russell Wilson. This trade sent shockwaves through the league, as we had not seen a trade of this size and magnitude in the NFL for some time. But for a team that had commonly been perceived as a team that was, quote, a QB away for a couple years now, this was Payton's and the Broncos' signal to the league that they were going all in. This trade started a domino effect, as the Raiders traded for Packers all-pro receiver Davante Adams, the Chargers traded for Khalil Mack and signed J.C. Jackson, and with the Chiefs still being there, the AFC West suddenly became what many believed to be the best division in football. Seeing as they traded their first and second round picks, the draft was not super eventful, although the Broncos did pick up Nick Benito with the 64th pick, who would blossom into one of the league's best edge rushers in the following years. And the Broncos made one more splash in free agency, signing edge rusher Randy Gregory away from the Cowboys at the last minute. Coming into the season, the Broncos were given the 8th best odds to win the Super Bowl. So that QB away smoke, it was legit. And before the season started, the Broncos decided it would be good business to lock up Wilson before he even played a snap for him. They signed him to a 5-year, $245 million contract. Again, before he even played a snap for the team.
Let's ride.
The season started with a Week 1 tilt, Monday Night Football in Seattle against Wilson's former team. What a perfect way to start a new era of Broncos football. Sorry, what's that?
Let's ride.
What?
Let's ride.
What do you mean they had all three of their timeouts, didn't use a single one, and decided to try and kick a 64-yard game-winning field goal? So, yeah, an absolute disaster of a start to the season, including 2 fumbles on the goal line. But, hey, it's all good. It's just one game, new offense. They'll work out the kinks. They won their next 2 against the Texans and Niners by scores of 16-9 and 11-10. They dropped 4 in a row after that, which included the undisputed worst game in NFL history in Week 5 against the Colts, losing 12-9, and a win in London against the Jags had the Broncos at 3-5 heading into the bye, with their offense averaging a whopping 15 points per game. For those of you doing the math, yes, that is 2 touchdowns, with one of them being a 2-point conversion per game. With the mistakes, straight up boneheaded play calls, it was becoming clear that Nathaniel Hackett wasn't way over his head. I think that's putting it kindly. The Broncos came out of the bye and dropped 5 in a row to get to 3-10, and after a win against the Cardinals, I was at this one as well. The crowd was one of the saddest I've ever seen. The Broncos walked into SoFi Stadium on Christmas, and they got pantsed by the Rams by a score of 51-14. After a fight broke out on the Broncos sideline, it became clear what needed to be done. Before his first season was even over, and the day after Christmas, that's cruel, the Broncos fired Nathaniel Hackett and split the last 2 games to end up 5-12. Russell Wilson wrapped up the year throwing 3,524 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions, and an 84.4 QB rating. By far the worst statistical year of his career. There's a lot of blame to go around for why this season was as bad as it was, mainly in Nathaniel Hackett, but yeah, also Russell Wilson. The O-line was terrible. Management just didn't really surround the team with much talent at all. This season definitely was a failure. In my opinion, it's the worst in Broncos history just because of how, all chips in this management was. I remember how excited I was for the season to start. I can imagine that was the same for all Broncos fans out there. And for it to just go like that, it was just utterly abysmal. So heading into the 2023 offseason, one thing was abundantly clear. Changes needed to be made, and they needed to be made now. The only thing that was up for interpretation was for management and, what those changes needed to be. The first order of business was, again, finding a new coach, because the last couple have gone so swimmingly. The Broncos decided to swing big. They had to trade a first-round pick to do it because his rights were still owned by the Saints. They decided to hire Super Bowl winning head coach Sean Payton. Sean Payton came in and he brought in a couple of names that will become significant in the following years. Vance Joseph, yes, that Vance Joseph, at defensive coordinator, and Davis Webb in at quarterbacks coach. The next was making the O-line a top priority, as it was a large reason the Broncos' offense was as miserable as it was. The Broncos brought in tackle Mike McGlinchey from the 49ers and guard Ben Powers from the Ravens in free agency. The Broncos also made one of the biggest signings they've ever made in free agency, as they brought in from the Cardinals defensive lineman Zach Allen. With an already gutted pool of draft picks from the Russell Wilson trade, it was not a super busy draft for the Broncos, but they were still able to grab wide receiver Marvin Mims out of Oklahoma at 63 and cornerback Riley Moss from Iowa at 83. The Broncos were not done there. Right before the season, they traded for Peyton's kicker in New Orleans, Will Lutz, and they traded cardio merchant Randy Gregory to the 49ers a couple weeks into the season. When the season got going, it did not get going well. Sitting at 0-2, fresh off of a 21-3 lead to the Commanders that they blew at home, the Broncos went into Miami to face the Dolphins. I need a minute before this part of the video. All right, I'm ready. The Broncos proceeded to put up one of the worst... No, I'll backtrack on that. The worst defensive performance in modern NFL history. The Broncos lost to the Dolphins that day 70-20. 70-20. The Broncos did get into the win column with a comeback of their own in Chicago the following week, but they found themselves at 1-5 a few weeks later. What followed was one of the most impressive midseason turnarounds I've ever seen. It started with a 19-17 win over the Packers, but it really got going the next week against the defending champion Chiefs. We're this far into the video, and I don't know how this hasn't come up yet. Heading into this game, the Broncos had not beaten the Chiefs since 2015. The Chiefs, a team the Broncos play twice a year. A very good team. I'll acknowledge that 100%. A very good team during this stretch. But it's a team the Broncos play twice a year every season, and they had not beaten them since 2015. I was in 5th grade the last time they beat the Chiefs. In 2023, I was a freshman in college. The Chiefs had beaten the Broncos 16 straight times before this game. I'm glad to say the Broncos not only broke this streak in Week 8 of the 23 season, they manhandled the Chiefs. It was a 24-9 win in which the defense absolutely suffocated the Chiefs. The Chiefs got nothing going all day. And the Broncos headed into the bye with a much more respectable 3-5 record. Still not ideal, but a lot more manageable. Coming out of the bye, the Broncos had another huge test in Buffalo on Monday night against Josh Allen's Bills. Denver proceeded to force 4 turnovers, including on the first play of the game, and Russell Wilson did just enough to help the Broncos earn a huge win thanks to a last-second field goal by Will Lutz, getting the Broncos to 4-5 and that win streak to 3. The following week, this Linsanity run ran into another one, welcoming in Josh Dobbs' Vikings on Sunday Night Football. In another game where the defense did all the work just for Russell Wilson's offense to make the game-winning play at the end, the Broncos escaped with a 21-20 victory. Then the following week, the defense put on another clinic with a 29-12 victory over the Browns, getting the win streak to 5 and the Broncos to 6-5. The Magic finally ran out the next week in a heartbreaker against rookie phenom CJ Stroud and the Texans, as the Broncos lost 22-17, capped off by a Russell Wilson interception in the red zone in the final minute, dropping the Broncos back to 6-6. But hey, not the end of the world. The Broncos were in this exact same spot 5 years earlier after that little heater got them back to 6-6. So again, it's not ideal to lose to a team you're competing with for a wildcard spot, but they can manage this. The Broncos split their next 2, beating the Chargers, then getting trounced by the Lions. So the Broncos sat at 7-7 in their playoff hopes in pretty dire straits as they played host to the 3-11 Patriots on Christmas Eve night. Hey, Christmas Eve night, primetime game, home crowd, 3-11 team on the other side. This is a gimme, right? Yeah, no, wrong. The Broncos offense once again did nothing. And after some crazy and wacky bounces, the Broncos found themselves in a 23-7 hole halfway through the fourth quarter. But in classic Russell Wilson fashion, he once again decided he was done doing nothing. He led back-to-back touchdown drives with 2-point conversions to tie the game back up at 23 with 2:53 to go in regulation. The defense decided that it was their turn to do nothing, as they let the Patriots march into field goal range, and Chad Ryland drilled a 56-yard field goal with 2 seconds left to give the Patriots the win, effectively ending the Broncos' slim playoff hopes. After this loss and the fallout of this loss is where part 2 of this video begins to end. A report came out after this loss that during the Broncos bye week, right off the heels of that huge win over the Chiefs, the Broncos approached Russell Wilson and asked him to give up a portion of guaranteed money in his contract that was looked at as an injury guarantee, in which Wilson refused. So, I think that both sides are pretty valid here. Wilson was unwilling to give up guaranteed money he and his agent worked to get in his contract. Fair. But the Broncos told him, you aren't playing good enough to have that much of an injury guarantee, which is also valid. And a lot of people will tell you Russell Wilson was very good this season, throwing for 3,070 yards, 26 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions with a 98 quarterback rating. Honestly, though, this is a narrative brought on from him simply just not turning the ball over. So, excuse me for not being happy with my quarterback doing the bare minimum. As you can recall, there were multiple games where he and his offense did nothing. I digress, though. This story came out at this point because for the final 2 games, the Broncos announced they were benching Russell Wilson, and they were going with backup Jarrett Stidham, all but essentially ending the Russell Wilson era in Denver. The Broncos split Stidham's 2 starts, beating the Chargers at home 16-9, and losing to the Raiders 27-14 in Las Vegas to end the year at 8-9. I was at that Chargers game. Genuinely, one of the worst sporting events I've ever been to.
Broncos country, let's ride.
So the 2024 offseason started with a move that everyone expected. The Broncos terminated Russell Wilson's contract and released him. In doing so, the Broncos ate an NFL record $85 million of dead cap spread over the 2024 and 2025 seasons. They would eat $53 million of that in 2024 and the remaining $32 million in 2025. The Broncos also shipped off former first-round pick Jerry Jeudy to the Browns, who ended up having a very up and down but overall disappointing tenure with the Broncos. The Broncos also said goodbye to one of the franchise's best. Safety Justin Simmons was waived as well. This truly was the start of a new era for the Broncos. With all that dead cap, the Broncos were handcuffed in free agency, but they were still able to bring in some notable names: safety Brandon Jones from the Dolphins and defensive lineman Malcolm Roach from the Saints. All eyes, though, turned to the Broncos' 12th overall pick in the draft. There was a lot of speculation on whether the Broncos would try and snag their new long-term franchise quarterback with that pick, or try and tank in 2024 and try their hand at that in the 2025 draft. And honestly, it looked like they may not even get to make that decision, as the QBs were flying off the board in this draft. Caleb Williams went to the Bears at 1, Jaden Daniels to the Commanders at 2, Drake May to the Patriots at 3. The real shock was Michael Penix to the Falcons at 8, and JJ McCarthy to the Vikings at 10. For those of you keeping track, that is 5 quarterbacks in the first 10 picks. So when the Broncos were on the clock, they made a franchise-altering pick. With the 12th overall pick, the Denver Broncos selected, out of Oregon, quarterback Bo Nix. Both before and after the Bo Nix pick, the Broncos were perceived by the NFL world to be one of the league's worst teams, especially at the quarterback position. And the Bo Nix pick was largely criticized, cited as a reach and a desperation pick by the Broncos. Bo Nix ended up having a strong training camp and a strong preseason. He ended up winning the Week 1 starting job his rookie season. The first 2 weeks of the season appeared to be proving those initial judgments right, though, as the Broncos dropped Week 1 to the Seahawks 26-20 in Seattle, and then lost 13-6 to the Steelers at home in Week 2. The Broncos were only able to muster 132 and 231 passing yards in those games respectively, and turned the ball over 5 times in those 2 weeks. Heading into Week 3 against the undefeated Bucs, many thought that this season was going to spiral again just like the previous 2. However, the opposite happened. Denver blew out Tampa Bay 26-7, and Bo Nix had a very efficient day, throwing 25 of 36 for 216 yards and another 47 rushing yards with a rushing touchdown. The next week, in a monsoon in New York, those rookie struggles came back up. Nix only threw 60 yards, though he did throw his first career touchdown pass in this game. The Broncos managed a 10-9 win over the Jets to get back to 2-2. The next week against the Raiders, though, that's when this season really flipped. The Raiders got out to a hot start with 13th overall pick in the 2024 draft. If you're keeping count, that's one after Bo Nix. Brock Bowers scored a 57-yard touchdown on their opening drive, and the Raiders were driving again, already up 10-3 early in the second quarter with a first and goal from the Denver 5. However, the Denver defense had other plans. Minshew tried to find Bowers for his second touchdown of the game, but Patrick Surtain picked him off and took it all the way back for a 100-yard pick 6, and the game completely flipped from there. Broncos led 13-10 at halftime and never looked back, as a big second half led them to a 34-18 victory over their division rivals. The Broncos dropped their next one against the Chargers, won 2 in a row over the Saints and Panthers, dropped their next 2 at Baltimore and a heartbreaker in Kansas City to sit at 5-5. So in Week 11, into town came the 6-4 Atlanta Falcons, a pretty good test for this team. But this game is really where the Broncos hit their stride. This game against the Falcons, it wasn't even a contest. The Broncos ran the Falcons out of the building with a 38-6 victory, backed by, so far, the best game of Bo Nix's young career. He was 28 of 33, passed for 370 yards and 4 touchdowns through the air. At this point, with the Broncos in a playoff race, considering their preseason expectations, there was some Offensive Rookie of the Year noise around Bo Nix that was starting to stir. This started a 4-game win streak for the Broncos, which had their bye in the midst of it, with huge wins over the Raiders, a Monday night thriller against the Browns, and a huge comeback over the Colts. I was at this game too. It was so awesome, especially when Benito housed that trick play that the Colts tried to pull off. That was so cool. And after this game, the Broncos sat at 9-5. After some crushing losses to the Chargers and Bengals to be at 9-7, heading into the final week, the Broncos' path was simple: winning in against the Chiefs. And the Broncos definitely got a good bounce here, as the Chiefs had already locked up the 1 seed at this point, so they would be resting most of their starters. The Broncos left no room for interpretation and did what starters should do against backups. They absolutely boat raced them. The Broncos won 38-0, and Bo Nix had a near perfect game, throwing 26-29 for 321 yards and 4 touchdowns, securing the Broncos' first playoff berth in 9 years. The Broncos did get matched up with a much more experienced Buffalo team with Super Bowl aspirations in the wildcard round, and they did end up getting smoked 31-7. But let's add some nuance to this. This was a year where the Broncos were expected to win 4 games. And if you can recall, this was also a season where they were eating an NFL record $53 million in dead cap, with 32 still on the way. So all in all, this was an incredible season for the Broncos, an incredible foundation season. And they were really looked at now as a team that was a destination again. They were back on the NFL map after a long time off of it. So the Broncos came into the 2025 season with something that they really had not experienced in a very, 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 very long time. Expectations. Given that they had found their guy at quarterback for real this time, they finally found him. The Broncos wanted to capitalize on this and surround him with as much talent as they could. They approached free agency with the goal of filling every possible hole that this roster had after still a very strong 10-7 season, bringing in tight end Evan Ingram, linebacker Dre Greenlaw, safety Talanoa Hufanga, and running back J.K. Dobbin. In the draft with pick number 20, the Broncos used the same strategy they used when they drafted Pat Surtain, building an incredibly deep secondary when they selected Texas's Jahdae Barron, who was a consensus top 2 corner in this draft that they got at 20. The Broncos also scooped up running back RJ Harvey out of UCF and wide receiver Pat Bryant out of Illinois in this draft. And with that new cap space opening up, the Broncos locked up some franchise cornerstones for the future. Courtland Sutton on a 4-year, $92 million deal, Zach Allen on a 4-year, $102 million deal, and Nick Bonito on a 4-year, $106 million deal. Coming into the season, those expectations on the Broncos, they were a bit of a mixed bag. There was plenty of noise that the Broncos were ready to take that next step, become Super Bowl contenders, and potentially even dethrone the Chiefs in the AFC West. While there was also plenty of noise that the Broncos were going to be disappointing, Bo Nix was going to have a sophomore slump, the Broncos were going to come back down to earth a little bit. All in all, coming into the year, the Broncos were given the 12th best odds to win Super Bowl 60. The season got off to a rocky start with an embarrassingly close Week 1 win versus the Titans, then back-to-back last-second losses to the Colts and Chargers, in which that first one against the Colts, they initially missed a 60-yard field goal, giving supposedly the Broncos the win, but a leverage penalty gave the Colts another shot at 45 yards, in which they made. So at 1-2, there was a lot of noise that the Broncos were slipping back into old habits, both from the NFL world as a whole and from the Broncos fan base as a whole, like myself included. I thought, oh my God, here we go again, and same old shit every year. No, this was not same old Broncos this year. A 28-3 win over the Bengals on Monday night in Week 4 started it, but the season really got going when the Broncos went into Philadelphia, down 17-3 in the second half, came back and beat the defending champs 21-17. After an ugly game in London against the Jets resulted in another win, the Broncos played host to the Giants, who stormed out to a 19-0 lead as the fourth quarter started, then a 26-8 lead deep into the fourth quarter. After making it 26-16 with 5:13 to go, an interception set the Broncos up with a short field, which they capitalized on with an RJ Harvey touchdown to make it 26-23 with 3:51 to go. When the Denver D forced a 3-and-out on the following drive, it all felt but inevitable at this point. Bo Nix led the Broncos into field goal range, highlighted by a 31-yard pass to Marvin Mims and a 20-yarder to Evan Ingram before Nix finished off the drive himself with an 18-yard touchdown rush, giving the Broncos a 30-26 lead with 1:51 to go. This was unfortunately too much time for Jackson Dart and the Giants, as a critical DBI set the Giants up at the Denver 2, which the Giants punched it in but missed the extra point, making it 32-30 with 37 seconds left. So yeah, comeback's dead in the water now, right? Wrong. Bo Nix is the bad man, and he was not losing this game. Starting at his own 23, Bo Nix hit Marvin Mims for 23 yards, and then Courtland Sutton for 22 yards, setting the Broncos up with a 38-yard attempted field goal to win the game, which Will Lutz obviously hit because that's what he does, giving the Broncos a 33-32 victory. For those of you at home keeping track, that's 33 points in the fourth quarter. Simply insane. The Broncos used this game as a catalyst to get white hot, smoking the Cowboys the next week 44-24, gutting out a tough one against the Houston defense 18-15, beating the Raiders 10-7, and then getting a huge win over the Chiefs 22-19 to take a stranglehold on the AFC West at 9-2 heading into the bye. Coming out of that bye, the Broncos kept it rolling. A thrilling 27-26 OT win over the Commanders, completing the sweep of the Raiders 24-17 in Vegas, and getting a well-earned win over a very good, at the time, Green Bay Packers team 34-26. The 11-game win streak did come to an end the following week against the Jaguars as they lost 34-20. I mean, I flew out on my birthday to go to this game. What the hell, guys? That's the game you decided to come out flat? Like, what are we doing? But they did finish the season strong, winning their final two over the Chiefs 20-13 and the Chargers 19-3 to finish the 2025 season 14-3, earning their first division title since 2015 in the AFC's 1 seed and that all-important first-round bye. After their week off, the Broncos got matched up with the 6th seed in the AFC. In a rematch from last year, they'd be playing Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills, though this was a much different Denver Broncos team than last year. The game started with Denver taking the opening drive all the way inside the Buffalo 10, However, a drop by Lil Jordan Humphrey led to the Broncos settling for 3. The Bills answered by marching down the field and making it 7-3 just before the first quarter ended. After a Denver 3-and-out, it looked like Buffalo was really getting the run game going, getting inside the Denver 35. However, a James Cook fumble switched the momentum right back to Denver, who took it and ran with it. Highlighted by a 27-yard gain to Marvin Mims, the Broncos marched down the field and capped off the drive with a 7-yard touchdown pass to backup tackle and former undrafted free agent Frank Crum to make it 10-7. Absolutely electric. Buffalo responded with a field goal of their own, making it 10-10 just before the 2-minute warning. Going into 2-minute drill mode, Bo Nix was in his zone, digging and dunking the Broncos down the field, first down, second down, first down, second down, before a beautiful play action saw the same Lil Jordan Humphrey make up for his mistake, hauling in a perfect ball on the 29-yard touchdown pass to make it 17-10 with 22 seconds to go in the half. Now, you would think, just having gone down by 7, the Bills would be content to sit on this and head into the break down just by 7. Well, you'd be wrong. On first down of the following drive, Josh Allen scrambled up the middle and in a complete lapse of thinking did not protect the football at all. He proceeded to fumble and Denver recovered at the Buffalo 32 with 2 seconds left, setting up a Will Lutz 50-yard field goal as time expired. A 10-10 game became a 20-10 one in just 20 seconds, and the break did not diminish the Broncos' momentum at all, as on just the second play of the second half, Nick Bonitto came in unblocked, smoked Josh Allen, knocking the ball free, and was picked up by Malcolm Roach at the Buffalo 17-yard line. Denver had a golden opportunity to really put the pressure on Buffalo, but after some pretty questionable play calling, they settled for 3, making it 23-10. Buffalo did kick it into gear. They drove down the field, and a Keon Coleman touchdown made it 23-17. On the following drive, Bo Nix had a pass intercepted by a Buffalo D lineman, turning the game completely. However, the Denver defense came up huge yet again, with backup safety filling in for Brandon Jones, PJ Locke, picking off Josh Allen 2 plays later. Denver couldn't capitalize though, giving the ball back to the Bills, who drove down the field and hit Dalton Kincaid for a 14-yard touchdown to take the 24-23 lead just as the fourth quarter began. Denver went 3-and-out once again, and Buffalo drove once again. This time though, the Denver defense bent, but it didn't break, holding the Bills to a field goal to make it 27-23. Getting the ball back with 4:06 to go, the next drive would be the first massive moment in Bo Nix's young career, and he delivered. Courtland Sutton also delivered on this drive, making his first 2 catches of the day, an 11-yarder and then later a 25-yarder. After a clutch conversion on 3rd and 4, thanks to a 6-yard Bo Nix scramble with 1:01 to go, Bo Nix stepped back, then dropped an absolutely beautiful ball right in the bucket for Marvin Mims, right in the corner of the end zone, giving the Broncos a 30-27 lead with 55 seconds left. The Bills did not go quietly. With timeouts to work with, they drove into field goal range as former Bronco Matt Prater hit a 50-yard field goal with 10 seconds left to send it to overtime, all squared at 30. Overtime started with the Bills winning the toss and deferring. After a first down on their first play, Denver couldn't get anything going, punting the ball back to the Bills, meaning that at this point, it was next score wins. Buffalo got into a rhythm, converting 2 clutch 3rd and mediums to get it to their own 36-yard line. On another 3rd down, 3rd and 11 this time, Josh Allen had time in the pocket after the Bills picked up a blitz, looked deep for Brandon Cooks, who went up for a 50-50 ball and came up on the wrong end of it, as Jaquan McMillan snatched that 50-50 ball away from Cooks as the two went to the ground, giving the Broncos the ball back at their own 20. A 24-yard catch and run from RJ Harvey put the Broncos at their own 47, and on 2nd and 10, Courtland Sutton was interfered with, and Joey Bosa roughed Bo Nix, putting the Broncos at the Buffalo 36. Field goal range, but not quite comfortable field goal range, but at this point, the Buffalo implosion was on. On 2nd and 12 from the 38, Bo Nix looked deep for Marvin Mims, and he was also interfered with, setting the Broncos up at the Buffalo 8-yard line. It was all elementary at this point, as after setting the ball up where he wanted it, Will Lutz kicked the game-winning field goal, sending the Broncos to the AFC Championship in Denver the following week with a 33-30 win. This was an instant classic of a game, the first playoff win since Super Bowl 50 10 years prior. It should have been a night of celebration, elation, and excitement for the Broncos and their fans as they started to get set to host the AFC Championship the following week. What transpired not even an hour after the game, I'm sure can be described by Broncos fans and everyone involved with the Broncos as just a nightmare scenario. On that play before Mims drew the game-winning DPI, Bo Nix scrambled to the left, losing 2 yards. In a post-game presser, head coach Sean Payton revealed that Bo Nix broke a bone in his ankle on that play. Essentially the second to last play of the game, putting him out for the rest of the season. I'll never forget the pit in my stomach when I first got that news. Throughout my entire fandom, and there's a lot of lows here too. There's the Mile High Miracle against the Ravens. There's Super Bowl 48. There's all those years of just those bad teams and missing the playoffs all those years in a row. This was the most dejected I've ever been after a Broncos game. And the Broncos won this game, which is just crazy. It essentially ended the season. Backup Jarrett Stidham did all that he could, but understandably against a tough New England defense, made no better by the skies opening up well into the second half, it just wasn't enough. The Broncos ended up losing the AFC Championship to the Patriots 10-7. So, yeah, as of right now, this story doesn't have a happy ending, no, but, it doesn't really have an ending, at all. The Broncos licked their wounds, and as of the 2026 offseason, they are officially free of the Russell Wilson dead cap hit, and they used that to their advantage, trading for Dolphins star receiver Jalen Waddle, truly putting their wide receiver room over the top. And they also promoted quarterbacks coach Davis Webb to offensive coordinator. I'm sure the same can be said for all the Broncos fans out there. I am antsy for the 2026 season to get going. I know, and I'm sure everyone else does, I know if we had our quarterback for that AFC Championship, we would have been playing for a Super Bowl. So I am so stoked for this season, for the 2026 season to get going. If the Broncos can keep this thing going, if they can stay healthy too, there's a legit shot they're hoisting Lombardi number 4 in February. But regardless of what happens next season, this has been a truly impressive turnaround for the Broncos. QB carousel, QB after QB after QB, coach after coach after coach after coach, going all in on who they thought was the guy at quarterback, all for it to blow up in their face and leave them with a fallout that looked near impossible. And a fallout that completely handcuffed them for 2 seasons to not only be competitive in those 2 seasons, but to come out of those 2 seasons with 2 playoff appearances, a division title, a 1 seed, a playoff win, a championship game appearance where everyone knows that they very well could have won that game if the balls bounced their way a little bit more. That is impressive to say the least. The Broncos were in a position where they were the laughingstock. Everyone laughed at them for eating a record NFL dead cap hit, and now they're the example. Do you remember those Dolphins all those years ago that beat these Broncos 70-20? You know what they're up to now? Nowadays, they're trying to replicate what the Broncos just did. They just cut ties with an underperforming quarterback in Tua Tagovailoa, and they are eating a new NFL record dead cap hit of $99.2 million. So they're doing the same thing that the Broncos did. They cut ties with their underperforming quarterback. They're going to cut their losses, eat the dead cap. They're going to try to find their next the guy as they start this new rebuild. Oh, how poetic sports is sometimes. But that is it for me. If you like this video, feel free to show some love. Give it a like. Feel free to subscribe. It's optional. Greatly appreciated, though. I have a couple more videos like this in the works. So again, if you like this style of video, feel free to let me know. Feel free to give this video some love. I had a lot of fun making this video, especially since this was my team. So again, I have a couple more videos like these, and I'm really excited to get those into the works. But in the meantime, that is it for me, and I'll see you in the next one.
Broncos country, let's ride. Broncos country, let's ride. Broncos country, let's ride. Broncos country, let's ride.